Okay, today is the 24th of July and we are on the Nidana Samyutta. Nidana is concerned with dependent origination, also specifically dependent origination of suffering. We come to the 11th sutta in this Samyutta. As I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. And he said, monks, there are these four kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be, and for the assistance of those about to come to be. What for? The nutriment edible food, gross or subtle. Second, contact. Third, mental volition. Fourth, consciousness. These are the four kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be, and for the assistance of those about to come to be. Let's stop here for a moment. These are four things that act like food to maintain our bodies, to maintain our physical body and our mental body. So, what are these four things? The first one is edible food, and edible food we know is necessary for our body to survive. We need food, physical food. Then the second is contact. Now, read to you the footnotes from the commentary. It says, the nutriments are conditions, or conditions are called nutriments, ahara, because they nourish or bring forth their own effects. Although there are other conditions for beings, these four alone are called nutriments because they serve as special conditions for the personal life continuity. For edible food is a special condition for the physical body of those beings who subsist on edible food. In the mental body, contact is a special condition for feeling, mental volition for consciousness, and consciousness for name and form. This one may be a bit hard to understand, so I try to explain. Physical food, edible food, we understand. The second is contact. Contact, once you have contact, then feeling arises, followed by perception, and then thinking, and then volition, deciding what to do. So, contact is the thing that triggers off the mental workings of the mind. So, that's why contact is nutriment for our mental body. Now, the third one is mental volition. Mental volition is, here the commentary says, is food for consciousness. But I think another interpretation we can use, this mental volition, the Pali word is mano sancetana, is, I believe it has something to do with the will to live, because the will to live is very important for us to survive, for us to continue to survive. If there's no will to live, then a being will die quite fast. So, mental volition. And the fourth is consciousness. Consciousness is more for those beings that are about to come to be. For example, if the male and the female mate, then the egg is fertilized. Now, the egg is fertilized, it does not have consciousness yet. So, this being that is due to be born in the womb, he will enter this fertilized egg. Then that consciousness descends into that fertilized egg. That is the condition, the nutriment for that being to come into life. Now I come back to this contact and mental volition. This contact, without contact, you can see how contact is a food, is a necessary condition For example, if a person is in prison, if you put somebody in a prison and you cut him off from contact from other people, and you cut him off from contact even with the sunlight, put him in a dark room, with nobody to speak to, no contact altogether, very soon this person will die. So that's why contact is you can see how contact is a nutriment for the maintenance of a being. Because once you have contact, then you have interest in the world, feeling arises. There are things in the world that you perceive through your six senses. All this is contact. The world is perceived through contact at the six sense doors. So because we have interest in the world, then we want to survive. The will to live is generated. On the other hand, you consider another prisoner under the same circumstances. He's put in isolation in a room. He's cut off from contact from everybody else, and even the sunlight, and no sound, nothing. And although he should die very soon, there are some people who will survive. Why? Because that person may be thinking of his family, think of his children, his wife. So when he thinks, this of course comes from his memory, doesn't come from contact, comes from his memory. So when this memory of the family is generated, the will to live is very strong. So because of the will to live, even though he should die, he will hold on to life. So this, I believe, is the third nutriment mentioned here. Mental volition is the will to live. And then consciousness must come into the womb for that being to come to life. So you can see here why these four are called nutriments. And the Buddha continued, monks, these four kinds of nutriment have what as their source, what as their origin, from what are they born and produced. These four kinds of nutriment have craving as their source, craving as their origin. They are born and produced from craving. Let's stop here for a moment. What craving is this? This craving is craving for existence and craving for sensual pleasures. Because of this craving, so we want to continue with life. And the Buddha continues. And this craving has what as its source, what as its origin, from what is it born and produced. This craving has feeling as its source, feeling as its origin. It is born and produced from feeling. Stop here for a moment. More specifically, this is feeling. We have pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral feeling. It is the pleasant feeling we experience that gives rise to craving to continue. And this feeling has what as its source? Feeling has contact as its source. And this contact has what as its source? Contact has the six sense bases as its source. And these six sense bases have what as their source? The six sense bases have mentality, materiality, phenomena as their source. And this mentality, materiality has what as its source? Has consciousness as its source. And consciousness has volition as its source. And volition has ignorance as its source. Thus monks, with ignorance as condition, volition comes to be. With volition as condition, consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volition. With the cessation of volition, cessation of consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So this sutta is about the four nutriments, how they feed our physical body and our mental body, and how they are necessary for beings to continue. The next sutta is 12.12. At Savatthi, the Buddha said, monks, there are these four kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be, and for the assistance of those about to come to be. What for? The nutriment edible food, gross or subtle. Second, contact. Third, mental volition. Fourth, consciousness. These are the 4 kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that have already come to be, and for the assistance of those about to come to be. When this was said, the Venerable Molya Paguna said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, who consumes the nutriment consciousness? Because he thought consciousness is a nutriment, who consumes it? And the Buddha said, not a valid question. I do not say one consumes. If I should say one consumes, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who consumes? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, for what is the nutriment consciousness a condition? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, the nutriment consciousness is a condition for the production of future renewed existence. When that which has come into being exists, the 6 sense bases come to be. With the 6 sense bases as condition, contact. Let's stop here for a moment. So here, you see, consciousness is a condition for the production of future renewed being or existence. So just like I mentioned just now, the egg in the womb is fertilized, then consciousness must come into that fertilized egg, and then it produces renewed existence. That being lodges itself in that fertilized egg. And then once that consciousness has come into that egg, then slowly the 6 sense bases are produced. Now, if we think about it, this is not the only case of consciousness producing renewed existence, because consciousness in the Buddha's teaching is not a constant flow. It's not a constant flow. Consciousness in the Buddha's teaching is momentary. Consciousness arises and passes away. Arises and passes away. Arises and passes away. Right? Whenever consciousness arises, that being comes into existence, right? And that being is alive when consciousness arises. Then when consciousness ceases, momentarily that being dies. And then when consciousness arises again, that being is come to life, and then it dies. But because this consciousness arises and passes away so fast that it would seem as though this is a continued consciousness, a stream of continued consciousness. But it is not so. Now, if we think carefully about it, every time this consciousness arises and passes away, why does it arise again? Why does it arise again? I think it is the will to live. Because of the will to live, the moment consciousness dies out, it has come into life again because of the will to live. That's why you see the chain of dependent origination. Avijja, paccaya, sankhara. Ignorance conditions volition. And volition conditions consciousness. Right? So this volition is the will to live. The will to live conditions consciousness to spring into life. And then it dies out in a short moment. And then because of the will to live, it arises again. So dependent origination can be considered like the traditional interpretation, 3 lives or 2 lives. But it can be considered right here and now, in this very life, moment to moment. You can consider in that way. And then this Venerable Molya Paguna asks, Venerable Sir, who makes contact? And the Buddha said, not a valid question. I do not say one makes contact. If I should say one makes contact, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who makes contact? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, with what as condition does contact come to be? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, with the 6 sense bases as condition, contact comes to be. With contact as condition, feeling. And stop here for a moment. So here you see, Contact means contact at the six sense doors. In order that you can, that contact can arise, of course you must have the six sense doors. That means you must have the six sense bases. And once there is contact at the six sense bases, then feeling arises. Venerable Sir, who feels? Not a valid question, the Blessed One replied. I do not say one feels. If I should say one feels, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who feels? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, with what as condition does feeling come to be? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, with contact as condition, feeling comes to be. With feeling as condition, craving. So we stop here for a moment. So, as we mentioned before, if you have pleasurable feeling, then craving arises. Venerable Sir, who craves? Not a valid question, the Blessed One replied. I do not say one craves. If I should say one craves, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who craves? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, with what as condition does craving come to be? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, with feeling as condition, craving comes to be. Craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence or being, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But Paguna, with the remainderless fading away and cessation of the six sense, of the six bases for contact, comes cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact, cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling, cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of being. With the cessation of being, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. That's the end of the sutta. So here, this sutta, the Buddha says, there is no being. This is what the Buddha implies. So because of that, you cannot say who consumes, or who feels, or who makes contact, etc. It's just that these conditions just arise naturally. It's just the perception of a being is just a perception in our mind. Now we come to the 15th sutta in this Nidana Samyutta at Savatthi. Then the Venerable Kachana Gota approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, Venerable Sir, it is said, right view, right view. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view? And the Buddha said, this world, Kachana, for the most part, depends upon the duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. We'll stop here for a moment. This in India at that time, most people either believe in the idea of existence or the idea of non-existence. This is another word for it, is a notion of existence. That means perpetual existence. That means eternalism view. That means when you die, you will continue to exist. And it's the same person who dies and is reborn. That is one extreme view. The other extreme view is non-existence. It's the annihilationist view. That once a person dies, there is no more rebirth. There is no more existence. These two views the Buddha does not accept because it assumes or presumes that a self exists. That a self exists. So they argue whether after death that self continues to exist or the self does not continue to exist. But in the Buddhist teaching, this self is just a concept in our mind that nature has planted in our mind to make us strive to fight for survival. And then the Buddha continued, but for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. This world, Kachana, is for the most part shackled by engagement, clinging and adherence. But this one with right view does not become engaged and cling through that engagement and clinging mental standpoint, adherence, underlying tendency. He does not take a stand about myself. He has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing. His knowledge about this is independent of others. It is in this way, Kachana, that there is right view. All exists, Kachana, this is one extreme. All does not exist, this is the second extreme. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volition comes to be. With volition as condition, consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, comes cessation of volition. With the cessation of volition, cessation of consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So the Buddha says that the Buddha's way of seeing is not whether a self exists after death or not, but everything is due to conditions. This world, everything in this world is conditionally arisen, dependently arisen, dependent on conditions. 12.16 at Savatthi. Then a certain monk approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said, Venerable Sir, it is said, a speaker on the Dhamma, a speaker on the Dhamma. In what way, Venerable Sir, is one a speaker on the Dhamma? Monk, if one teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of revulsion towards aging and death, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is a speaker on the Dhamma. If one is practicing for the purpose of revulsion towards aging and death, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. If through revulsion towards aging and death, through its fading away and cessation, one is liberated by non-clinging, one is fit to be called a monk who has attained Nibbana in this very life. Monk, if one teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of revulsion towards birth, for the purpose of revulsion towards ignorance, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is a speaker on the Dhamma. If one is practicing for the purpose of revulsion towards ignorance, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. If through revulsion towards ignorance, through its fading away and cessation, one is liberated by non-clinging, one is fit to be called a monk who has attained Nibbana in this very life. It's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha is saying the speaker of the Dhamma should be one who teaches with the purpose of revulsion towards aging and death, to make people see that we should have revulsion towards birth, aging and death. 12.17. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Then in the morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking bowl and robe, entered Rajagaha for alms. The naked ascetic saw the Blessed One coming in the distance. Having seen him, he approached the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, he stood to one side and said to him, We would like to ask Master Gotama about a certain point, if he would grant us the favor of answering our question. Stop here for a moment. You see, the Buddha was going on alms round, and as the Buddha was going on alms round, this naked ascetic came and wanted to ask a question. So the Buddha said, This is not the right time for a question, Kassapa. We have entered among the houses. The second time and the third time, the naked ascetic said to the Blessed One, We would like to ask Master Gotama about a certain point, if he would grant us the favor of answering our question. This is not the right time for a question, Kassapa. We have entered among the houses. Then the naked ascetic, Kassapa, said to the Blessed One, We do not wish to ask Master Gotama much. Then the Buddha said, Then ask what you want, Kassapa. How is it, Master Gotama? Is suffering created by oneself? Not so, Kassapa, the Blessed One said. Then, Master Gotama, is suffering created by another? Not so, Kassapa, the Blessed One said. How is it then, Master Gotama? Is suffering created both by oneself and by another? Not so, Kassapa, the Blessed One said. Then, Master Gotama, has suffering arisen fortuitously, being created neither by oneself nor by another? Not so, Kassapa, the Blessed One said. How is it then, Master Gotama? Is there no suffering? It is not that there is no suffering, Kassapa. There is suffering. Then is it that Master Gotama does not know and see suffering? It is not that I do not know and see suffering, Kassapa. I know suffering. I see suffering. Let's stop here for a moment. So you see this naked ascetic, he say he's not going to ask much, but he's asking a lot. Then finally he said, whether you are asked, how is it, Master Gotama? Is suffering created by oneself? Or is it created by another? Or is it created by both? Or is it created by neither? In each case you say, not so, Kassapa. When you are asked, how is it then, Master Gotama? Is there no suffering? You say, it is not that there is no suffering, Kassapa. There is suffering. When asked, then is it that Master Gotama does not know and see suffering? You say, it is not that I do not know and see suffering, Kassapa. I know suffering. I see suffering. Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One explain suffering to me. Let the Blessed One teach me about suffering. And the Buddha said, Kassapa, if one thinks the one who acts is the same as the one who experiences the result, then one asserts, with reference to one existing from the beginning, suffering is created by oneself. When one asserts thus, this amounts to eternalism. But Kassapa, if one thinks the one who acts is one, the one who experiences the result is another, then one asserts with reference to one stricken by feeling, suffering is created by another. When one asserts thus, this amounts to annihilationism. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volition comes to be. With volition as condition, consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, comes cessation of volition. With the cessation of volition, cessation of consciousness, etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. When this was said, the naked ascetic Kassapa said to the Blessed One, Magnificent Venerable Sir, Magnificent Venerable Sir, the Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by the Blessed One, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go for refuge to the Blessed One, and to the Dhamma, and to the Bhikkhu Sangha. May I receive the going forth under the Blessed One. May I receive the higher ordination. Stop here for a moment. See this Kassapa, after the Buddha replied, they seem to have understood immediately. So he was so impressed that he wanted to be ordained under the Buddha. You notice here, normally in the suttas, when they go for refuge, they go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dhamma, and the Bhikkhu Sangha. Normally, we take refuge in the Bhikkhu Sangha, the monk Sangha. And then the Buddha said, Kassapa, one formerly belonging to another sect who desires the going forth and the higher ordination in this Dhamma Vinaya, lives on probation for 4 months. At the end of the 4 months, if the monks are satisfied with him, they may, if they wish, give him the going forth and the higher ordination to the state of a monk. But individual differences are recognized by me. And he said, if, Venerable Sir, one formerly belonging to another sect who desires the going forth and the higher ordination in this Dhamma Vinaya, lives on probation for 4 months, and if at the end of the 4 months, the monks, being satisfied with him, may, if they wish, give him the going forth and the higher ordination to the state of a monk. Then I will live on probation for 4 years. At the end of the 4 years, if the monks are satisfied with me, let them, if they wish, give me the going forth and the higher ordination to the state of a monk. Then the naked ascetic Kassapa received the going forth under the Blessed One, and he received the higher ordination. Let's stop here for a moment. So because this person was so sincere, he said, if normally people have to wait 4 months to be ordained, I'm willing to wait 4 years. So the Buddha saw that he was so earnest, so sincere, the Buddha immediately ordained him. And soon, not long after his higher ordination, dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent and resolute, the Venerable Kassapa, by realizing it for himself with direct knowledge in this very life, entered and dwelt in that unsurpassed goal of the holy life, for the sake of which cleansement rightly go forth from the household life into homelessness. He directly knew, destroyed his birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. And the Venerable Kassapa became one of the Arahants. It's the end of the sutta. So here he was asking whether suffering is created by oneself or created by another person, another being. And basically the Buddha wanted to tell him that suffering is not created by anybody, but created by conditions. So I explained dependent origination to him, and then he understood and decided to renounce. 12.18 at Savatthi. Then the wanderer Timbaruka approached the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, he sat down to one side and said, "How is it, Master Gotama? Are pleasure and pain created by oneself?" "Not so, Timbaruka," the Blessed One said. Then, Master Gotama, are pleasure and pain created by another? "Not so, Timbaruka," the Blessed One said. "How is it then, Master Gotama? Are pleasure and pain created both by oneself and by another?" "Not so, Timbaruka," the Blessed One said. Then, Master Gotama, have pleasure and pain arisen fortuitously, being created neither by oneself nor by another? "Not so, Timbaruka," the Blessed One said. "How is it then, Master Gotama? Is there no pleasure and pain?" "It is not that there is no pleasure and pain, Timbaruka. There is pleasure and pain." "Then is it that Master Gotama does not know and see pleasure and pain?" "It is not that I do not know and see pleasure and pain, Timbaruka. I know pleasure and pain. I see pleasure and pain." Whether you are asked, "How is it, Master Gotama? Are pleasure and pain created by oneself, or are they created by another, or are they created by both, or are they created by neither?" In each case you say, "Not so, Timbaruka." When you are asked, "How is it then, Master Gotama? Is there no pleasure and pain?" you say, "It is not that there is no pleasure and pain, Timbaruka. There is pleasure and pain." When asked, "Then is it that Master Gotama does not know and see pleasure and pain?" you say, "It is not that I do not know and see pleasure and pain, Timbaruka. I know pleasure and pain. I see pleasure and pain." "Noble Sir, let the Blessed One explain pleasure and pain to me. Let the Blessed One teach me about pleasure and pain." And the Buddha said, "Timbaruka, if one thinks the feeling and the one who feels it are the same, then one asserts with reference to one existing from the beginning, pleasure and pain are created by oneself. If I do not speak thus, but Timbaruka, if one thinks the feeling is one, the one who feels it is another, then one asserts with reference to one stricken by feeling, pleasure and pain are created by another. Neither do I speak thus. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volition comes to be. With volition as condition, consciousness comes to be, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volition. The cessation of volition, cessation of consciousness, etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. On this was said, the naked ascetic Timbaruka said to the Blessed One, "Magnificent Master Gotama, magnificent." And then he also took refuge with the triple gems, and then he became a lay follower of the Buddha. So here it's quite similar to the preceding one. The preceding was talking about suffering. Here is pleasure and pain. It's basically the same. 12.19 at Savatthi, Buddha said, "Monks, for the fool, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, this body has thereby originated. So there is this body, an external name and form, or external mentality, materiality. Thus this diet, dependent on the diet of body and namarupa, there is contact. There are just 6 sense bases, contacted through which, or through a certain one among them, the fool experiences pleasure and pain. Monks, for the wise man, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, this body has thereby originated. So there is this body and external Namarupa, mentality, materiality. Let's stop here for a moment. So here you see, Buddha says, we have this body, and externally there is mentality and materiality. We have this body, and this mentality and materiality is phenomena. Is phenomena. Phenomena is what consciousness is conscious of, the object of consciousness. That's why here it said to be external. Dependent on the diet, both of them, there is contact. There are just 6 sense bases, contacted through which, or through a certain one among them, the wise man experiences pleasure and pain. What, monks, is the distinction here? What is the disparity? What is the difference between the wise man and the fool? Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One. Take recourse in the Blessed One. It would be good if the Blessed One would clear up the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the monks will remember it. Then listen and attend closely, monks, I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, the monks replied. The Blessed One said, Monks, for the fool, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, this body has originated. For the fool, that ignorance has not been abandoned, and that craving has not been utterly destroyed. For what reason? Because the fool has not lived the holy life for the complete destruction of suffering. Therefore, with the breakup of the body, the fool fares on to another body. Faring on to another body, he is not freed from birth, aging and death, not freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair, not freed from suffering, I say. Monks, for the wise man, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, this body has originated. For the wise man, that ignorance has been abandoned, and that craving has been utterly destroyed. For what reason? Because the wise man has lived the holy life for the complete destruction of suffering. Therefore, with the breakup of the body, the wise man does not fare on to another body. Not faring on to another body, he is freed from birth, aging and death, freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair, freed from suffering, I say. This, monks, is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the wise man and the fool, that is, the living of the holy life. That's the end of the sutta. So here, the Buddha says the difference between the wise man and the fool is that the wise man follows the Dhamma and practices the Dhamma to end suffering, whereas the fool is not interested in the Dhamma, continues with the life of a normal person and will continue on the round of rebirths, suffering for a long time. 12.20 at Savatthi. Monks, I will teach you dependent origination and dependently arisen phenomena. Listen and attend closely. I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, the monks replied. And what, monks, is dependent origination? With birth as condition, aging and death comes to be. Whether there is an arising of Tathagatas or no arising of Tathagatas, that element still persists. The stableness of the Dhamma, the fixed cause of the Dhamma, specific conditionality. A Tathagata awakens to this and breaks through to it. Having done so, he explains it, teaches it, proclaims it, establishes it, discloses it, analyzes it, elucidates it. And he says, see, with birth as condition, monks, aging and death, with existence as condition, birth, with clinging as condition, existence, with craving as condition, clinging, with feeling as condition, craving, with contact as condition, feeling, with the 6 sense bases as condition, contact, with mentality, materiality as condition, the 6 sense bases, with consciousness as condition, mentality and materiality, with volition as condition, consciousness, with ignorance as condition, volition. Whether there is an arising of Tathagatas or no arising of Tathagatas, the element still persists. The stableness of the Dhamma, the fixed cause of the Dhamma, specific conditionality. The Tathagata awakens to this and breaks through to it. Having done so, he explains it, teaches it, proclaims it, establishes it, discloses it, analyzes it, elucidates it, and he says, see, with ignorance has conditioned monks, volition. Thus monks, the actuality in this, the inerrancy, the not otherwiseness, specific conditionality, this is called dependent origination. And what monks are the dependently arisen phenomena? Aging and death, monks, is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away and cessation. Similarly, birth is impermanent, existence is impermanent, clinging is impermanent, craving is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, contact is impermanent, six sense bases are impermanent, mentality, materiality is impermanent, consciousness is impermanent, volition is impermanent, ignorance is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, subject to destruction, vanishing, fading away and cessation. These monks are called dependently arisen phenomena. When monks, a noble disciple has clearly seen with correct wisdom, as it really is, this dependent origination and these dependently arisen phenomena, it is impossible that he will run back into the past, thinking, did I exist in the past? Did I not exist in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what did I become in the past? Or that he will run forward into the future, thinking, will I exist in the future? Will I not exist in the future? What will I be in the future? How will I be in the future? Having been what will I become in the future? Or that he will now be inwardly confused about the present, thus, do I exist? Do I not exist? What am I? How am I? This being, where has it come from? And where will it go? For what reason is this impossible? Because monks, the noble disciple has clearly seen with correct wisdom, as it really is, this dependent origination and these dependently arisen phenomena. That's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha says, whether Buddhas arise in the world or Buddhas do not arise, the fixed law of Dhamma is always there. Whether Buddha is here to explain it to us or Buddha is not here to explain it to us, we are all bound by these laws of the Dhamma. Dhamma is just about reality, the truth about existence. It's just that the Buddha has become enlightened. He has seen through all this, so he explains it to us. But whether he does explain or he does not explain, we are all bound by all these laws of the Dhamma, or the laws of the universe. So among them is this dependent origination, that suffering arises because of these conditions. And these conditions, the Buddha says, all are impermanent, dependently arisen. That means suffering itself, birth itself, being, clinging, craving, all this is impermanent. So because it is impermanent, it can change. So if we understand how to dismantle these 12 links, then we are freed from the round of rebirths. So in the end, the Buddha says, if a person understands the Dhamma and sees that everything is dependently arisen, then he will not speculate about himself in the past or in the future and all that. It's only concerned with the here and now. But most people, because we don't understand the Dhamma, we are all concerned about the past, the present, and all our the future, and all the things in the world that we think are I and mine. All the things that belong to us, we think we cannot let go. But actually, the Buddha says, nothing actually belongs to us. We came empty-handed and we'll be going off empty-handed. Even this body does not belong to us. How can anything belong to us when the body itself also doesn't belong to us? 12.22 at Savatthi, the Buddha said, monks, possessing the 10 powers and the 4 grounds of self-confidence, the Tathagata claims the place of the chief bull of the herd, roars his lion's roar in the assemblies, and sets rolling the Brahma wheel thus. Such is form, such its origin, such its passing away, such is feeling, such its origin, such its passing away, such is perception, such its origin, such its passing away, such is volition, such is the origin, such is passing away. Such is consciousness, such its origin, such is passing away. Thus, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. That is, with ignorance as condition, volition comes to be. With volition as condition, consciousness, etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, comes cessation of volition. With the cessation of volition, cessation of consciousness, etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Monks, the Dhamma has thus been well expounded by me, elucidated, disclosed, revealed, stripped of patchwork. When monks, the Dhamma has thus been well expounded by me, elucidated, disclosed, revealed, stripped of patchwork. This is enough for a clansman who has gone forth out of faith to arouse his energy thus. Willingly, let only my skin, sinews and bones remain, and let the flesh and blood dry up in my body. But I will not relax my energy so long as I have not attained what can be attained by manly strength, by manly energy, by manly exertion. Monks, the lazy person dwells in suffering, soiled by evil, unwholesome states, and great is the personal good that he neglects. But the energetic person dwells happily, secluded from evil, unwholesome states, and great is the personal good that he achieves. It is not by the inferior that the supreme is attained. Rather, it is by the supreme that the supreme is attained. In other words, you want to attain the supreme results, you need supreme effort. Monks, this holy life is a beverage of cream. The teacher is present. Therefore, monks, arouse your energy for the attainment of the as yet unattained, for the achievement of the as yet unachieved, for the realization of the as yet unrealized, with the thought, in such a way this going forth of ours will not be barren, but fruitful and fertile. And when we use the robes, alms, food, lodgings and medicinal requisites offered to us by others, these services they provide for us will be of great fruit and benefit to them. Thus, monks, should you train yourselves. Considering your own good, monks, it is enough to strive for the goal with diligence. Considering the good of others, it is enough to strive for the goal with diligence. Considering the good of both, it is enough to strive for the goal with diligence. That's the end of the sutta. So the Buddha says, he has the 10 powers and the 4 grounds of self-confidence. So he claims the chief bull of the herd, roars his lion's roar, and starts rolling the Dhamma. Just now he was explaining the 5 aggregates, body, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness. What it is, how it arises, how it passes away and all that. And then the Buddha said, since the Dhamma is so well revealed by Samma Sambuddha, we should put forth all our energy to practice the Buddha's words, even to the extent that only skin and bones remain. Even then, we should exert all our energy. The lazy person dwells in suffering, soiled by evil, unwholesome states. The energetic person dwells happily, secluded from evil, unwholesome states. It is not by the inferior that the supreme is attained. That means not by small effort that you can get big results. You want big results, you need big effort. So this not only applies to monks, it also applies to lay people. Once you have heard the Dhamma, you don't practice it, you are what the Buddha calls a fool. Just now he says the difference between the fool and the wise man. The fool, having heard the Dhamma, still doesn't want to practice. But the wise man, he knows if you practice the Dhamma, it's good for you, it's good for others, it's good for both. 12.23 at Savatthi. Monks, I say that the destruction of the Asavas. This is a very long sutta. And I think I'll stop here and continue the next day. Buddha has put in a lot of effort to teach us the Dhamma. 45 years the Buddha went around. preaching the suttas. And now we are so lucky, we have most of the Buddha's words in book form. So if we don't invest a little bit of money to buy these Nikayas and study it, the Buddha says we must be a fool. Anything to discuss? Yeah. The next sutta we are going to read tomorrow night is exactly this. That the condition for seeing things as they really are is samadhi. So the deeper samadhi you have, the more clearly you see. The less samadhi you have, the less depth your vision. So that's why if you don't have good samadhi, a person who listens to the Dhamma, at most he can become a sotapanna. It's part of his fruit. But a person with the 4 jhanas, when he listens to the same Dhamma, he can become liberated and become an arahant. Yeah, in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha talked about those things that are difficult to find in the world. One is like a person who is grateful if you've done him a favor. Another one is the Buddha. Buddha is another rare person to find in the world. Another one, a person who can teach the Dhamma like the Buddha. Who can teach the Dhamma almost like the Buddha, also very rare to find. Yes, we are so fortunate to have the Buddha's words in black and white. So we just take the trouble to study it again and again. And then as we meditate and clear our mind, slowly we understand. Studying the Dhamma is not easy. When I first came to the Dhamma, maybe I have strong affinity with the Dhamma. When I came to the Dhamma, I was extremely happy to meet the Dhamma again. Then, but in spite of that, when I started reading the Buddha's words, I found it very hard to understand. But then I continued studying, then I realized slowly the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle slowly fit together, and we begin to see the overall picture. In the beginning, you don't see the overall picture. You don't see what it looks like. Only after many pieces fall into place, then you begin to see clearer and clearer. So in the same way as we study the suttas, in the beginning, many things we don't understand. But as we keep on plodding through the suttas, because each sutta explains the Dhamma in a different way, from a different angle. So as we read more suttas, then we see it from more viewpoints, then we understand better. So that's why I always encourage people to study as many suttas as possible. And I always say it's not necessary to learn Pali, because there are some people, they spend a lot of time learning Pali, and after they learn Pali, they go through the sutta word by word, they try to analyze each word and all that. And you find they haven't gone through many suttas. So because they haven't gone through many suttas, their knowledge of the Dhamma is not so good. That's another person, even though he does not know Pali, he goes through all the suttas and goes through many times, his understanding will be much better. The Buddha is a very straightforward person. He talks, he's not to curry favor, not to be popular or what. The Buddha's words are very straightforward. Like just now, the sutta we read, the difference between a wise man and a fool. The fool doesn't want to practice the Dhamma. It's very true. Only thing is some people hear this kind of words, they're not happy. Okay, there's nothing that's a merit.